John Borthwick, CEO of Betaworks. Welcome to Keynote Media.
Hi, Andrew. Welcome.
So, John, Betaworks is an incubator or a holding company of real-time media. Is that right?
That's correct. I mean, what we are is that we are we're set up as a company. When we started out, a lot of people thought we were initially an investment group because we invest in companies. But then we started building things. People thought we were an incubator. And now I think that sort of the vision of Betaworks is becoming more visible, which is that we're a combination. We're a company that either we've invested, we've built some things like Bitly and like Jarbeat, and then we've actually acquired three things. So three companies, three small companies. So Betaworks today is a network of 22 companies, some of which we own small pieces of, some of which we own large pieces of, and a subset of those, 5 of them, we actually operate out of our offices. So we view ourselves as next generation media company.
So you're one of the pin-up boys of this new thing called the real-time economy, which is the next big thing after Web 2.0, or some people see as the next big thing. Very briefly, what would you describe the real-time economy as in media terms?
Sure. So, when we started out Betaworks 2.5 years ago, we called it the Now Web. The term real-time is sort of stark. You can't pick these names, but real-time is the term people use today. To me, it is about a combination of, there's a flow of real-time data that is moving mostly, I use the term flow because it's moving mostly in streams, which means that it's actually represented, the data is often represented better, not on a web page, but on something that is optimized for streams. And so there's a lot of applications on cell phones, there's applications on the desktop like TweetDeck, which are things that are really built around streams. So it's a flow of real-time information in streams. It's public, it's searchable, it's navigable, and it's structured, and it's data that can be structured. Structured so that it's more interesting for users, so they can find stuff, organize stuff, filter stuff, and also structured so it's more interesting for publishers, so the publishers can sort of rebundle and put sort of clumps of this stuff together. And then lastly, sort of still hypothetical, but I think many people believe it may be more useful for advertisers down the road.
So two of the big problems of the Web 2.0 economy were the issue of how to monetize content. Many companies struggling to figure out business models in a user-generated, content-centric media business. And secondly, the whole problem or question of intellectual piracy. What new or old issues do you think real media brings to this, real-time media or the now economy?
That's a great question. So the first hypothesis that monetizing Web 2.0 was hard, I disagree with, because I think that one of the great successes of Web 2.0 was clearly Google, and Google's monetization engine was very effective at monetizing a long piece of what a lot of people call the long tail. What it was not, which you pinpointed, what it never monetized effectively was social media. And so, easy to take a well-trafficked blog that 10 years ago would have been trying to sell the ad banners, turn that onto Google and actually turn on some revenue. So that works. But taking a social stream of data and turning on Google on that, or trying to monetize that is still not there. So how does real-time affect that? I think that the real-time, we don't know yet. I mean, it's still early days. I think that for many people, the promise of real-time from an advertising perspective is the assumption is that social circles and online social forums are where a lot of people establish their interest in a particular area, which then eventually can turn into a purchase. And so I think that a marketing person would say the opportunity on the social side is that if you can actually put together these clusters of people who are interested in a particular thing, so people who are interested in Nexus 1, and then try and step them through a process which ends up in a purchase. So it's sort of pre-intent. If Google is all about intent-driven monetization, this is before that. I think the Facebook guys are experimenting in that space. I'm not sure if that is. I'm not sure if that's doable actually, because I think that what happens is these real-time groups sort of coalesce very quickly and clump very quickly, and trying to organize them around a marketing theme, I think, may be sort of a wet dream of how marketing used to work. In other words, you can be that directive about how about marketing. So I think that monetization of real time is still very, very early days. Now that said, is that you'll see Betaworks companies in 2010. We're going to monetize a handful of things at Betaworks. I think, and my plan is to do that fairly aggressively in 2010. You know, one of the things we saw last year, at the end of the year, is we saw the Twitter team do their monetization deals with the search engines. And that's a new form of monetization, because they were taking a social stream of data and using it as monetizing it, selling it to the search engines as essentially signals to improve search and to add the real-time stream into search. And so I think that there are some new monetization paths like that that could really that could open up here. I think that the assumption that we've lived by for the last 5-6 years has been that everything is going to monetize through advertising, and advertising is the holy grail of everything. I hope and I think that that's going to actually be challenged by real time.
And how do you see the now economy or the real-time economy impacting on traditional media companies' content?
Yes, that was your second question. So I think that it's dislocating and disruptive for the online companies who were disrupting the old media companies, 5-10 years ago. So for traditional media, it's interesting because they could almost leapfrog the problems and maybe even some of the IP issues and move into this world sort of faster than some of the incumbent online players who've now built established businesses that are dependent upon a page-based sort of non-real-time, non-social experience. So I think that it's possible that some of the traditional media companies could make that jump. That's hard, right? It's clearly a leap into the unknown, and I think that you can see that the amount of pressure that right now is on specific sort of old media models, newspapers, great example, film coming because DVD, DVD sales slump, theatricals, sort of not a lot of growth in theatrical. The video, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on monetization of video over the next 5 years. And then clearly music. Now, how could that move into real time? I think that a lot of it is still, it's still under construction. But specifically in music, you could see services like Spotify, making the streaming model into a real model. And I think that as part of the real time phenomena, implicit in it is that there's been this debate for 5 years plus of are we going to stream or are we going to download? And I think that you're seeing now a shift towards the stream model.
What is this shift towards streaming and the appearance of the now economy? What impact does it have, if any, on the problem of intellectual property, of piracy, and in terms of these bigger debates about the infrastructure of the internet, particularly network neutrality?
So let me sort of take those one by one. So on the piracy front, in my old days, I was up at Time Warner, and whenever we would talk about at least film piracy, we would talk about it in sort of 2 areas. We'd talk about professional piracy, right, which is something that people online, your job, my job, don't talk about that often, which is these basic shops that are taking DVDs and pressing out hundreds of thousands, millions of illegal copies of them and selling them on the street, right? So there's that professional piracy issue, which is very much the whole China debate around IP. And then there's online piracy, right, which is the one which we always think about and talk about in our industry, people ripping stuff. So I think that the stream model does have implications for this, because as content becomes, as the bandwidth and the infrastructure is there to stream content, the traditional content owners or it become a very easy place for you to go find a piece of content and grab it and stream it, right? Netflix is a remarkable service, and that in a period of 18 months they've turned streaming onto, I think I saw a stat from them about a week ago, about almost half of their customers are now using streaming. It's remarkable. I mean, the shift that you've seen on the Kindle, which I know that's a weird one, but that's almost streaming of books, right? It's the amount of people who are buying on the Kindle versus the paper books. You know, Bezos said that number was in the, I think, in the high 30s or low 40s% of people who were buying now. So that is those are big numbers, and you can see. I think that this has implications. I think that.
But you're saying it's a good thing that streaming, you think, is a more effective technology against piracy?
Well, I mean, I think that streaming has traditionally been for content owners. You know, my old friends at Time Warner Cable, you know, they wanted to push the DVR into the corner here and go with a full stream service, because the moment the content exists on your hard drive, it can then get out in the wild and you could do a whole bunch of things with it, right? So I think that from a very traditional content owner standpoint, yes, streaming has always been considered a good thing, because so long as you have a connection, you have control of the content, right? They think. I think that today we've got streaming content that's available. That content is also available in downloadable form. And then you've also got a remix culture that is like trying to take all that content and do all these sometimes insanely creative and interesting things with it. So I think it adds to the debate. I don't think that there's a black and white solution here for anyone, including the big media companies. I don't think there's a lot of people who look at the iPad and say, this is a great device which I can stream to and control a whole bunch of the content experience. Yes, but if you're sending it to an iPad, you're probably sending it in some form or another to something that could also be addressed on a web browser on a PC, and then could be remixed and so on. So I think that it's not that there's going to be more content companies who are comfortable with the endpoints, but I don't think it's a black and white world where everybody feels like the genie's back at the bottom.
What most worries you about the now economy in terms of making it a viable platform for next generation media companies?
I honestly don't. I haven't thought a lot about that question. When the first part of your question, what most worries me about the now economy and the real-time content stream, I think a lot about that part of the question.
Well, deal with that first.
So let me deal with that. Yeah. So the half-life of the content and the perishability of ideas is one of the things that worries me the most. Is that, you know, there's something incredibly wonderful about this massive simultaneous real-time connections and sharing, but it also can tend to dilute an issue down to either social groups that all agree with one particular view of the issue and they never actually have a forum to see an opposing view, or it can reduce an issue down to its most simplistic sort of chunky, soundbitey form, and all of the sort of richness and thought that used to go into a particular issue or would go into an issue is lost. And so that actually, you know, as it relates to traditional media, it does relate, because a good piece of what traditional media has done, I think, is providing, over time, is providing broader context to a particular issue. You know, take radio as a great example of that, is right, you know. So you see a show like, NPR, All Things Considered, right? Take a particular political issue or cultural issue, and it's a 20-minute segment where there's a real discussion on that issue. You may agree, you may disagree, but at the end of the day, you're going to have more context around that issue than you would have. But now all that you're getting something that's flying across the transom saying, you know, Tea Party's good, Tea Party's bad, Sarah Palin, you know, is Jesus, Sarah Palin is the Antichrist, and you know, people move into their respective camps, and the dialogue is minimized to next to nothing. And so that, I think, is something which we've got to figure out how to use this medium, because at the end of the day, we're constructing this medium, right? I mean, I do believe that the internet has a grain to it, and so that there are certain things that move with that grain and there are certain things that don't. But I also think that we're people who are building companies and users who are building content and producers of any kind who are engaged in this, we're responsible, accountable for what's being created, and we're right in the middle of it, of creating this thing. So figuring out how we can make those feedback loops actually work so that we can bring those opposing points of views together, I think is real important.
And so you've cleverly avoided the key question on economics. Let's go back to that.
Well,
you have a holding company of some of the most promising next generation now media companies. Are there one or perhaps two problems that the companies that you manage are very different, but they tend to be more infrastructure companies? Are there issues, broad economic issues, that you think next generation now media companies are going to have to confront?
The broad economic issues. I mean, I think I'm not sure I really am. Let me try and answer the question. You tell me if I'll answer it. I'll give you one. Is that I think that for 5 years, 10 years, we've been deluding ourselves that ad banners actually do much online. And there's been this collective delusion between the advertisers and publishers. And I think that ad banners, I think that many users have habituated that they just zone out and they just ignore this many pixels that is above or below something. So I think that in the real-time web, all that sort of suddenly gets flushed out in the open because ad banners just really aren't a relevant way to either target or find people or even place them in streams. So does that answer your question? I mean,
it does, although of course it raises another question, that if what the real-time economy is doing, and I think you're absolutely right, is, as you say, flushing out much of the lack of a sort of foundation for the advertising economy, then what replaces it? What finances media companies in the future if advertising doesn't work and people aren't willing to pay for content?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, I think that that's something which we do think a lot about at Betaworks. So, you know, the answer that for 15 years has been sort of the norm in the high-tech industry is that venture capital has funded a lot of this stuff. In the last, you know, 9 years, you know, since the internet bubble, there really was never a revival of the IPO bubble. So there's been a lot of capital that's flowed into technology since the collapse of Web 1.0. But there hasn't been the exits that there were through the IPO market. And so you have now a lot of capital, a lot of money that's been invested and tied up in these companies. And it's not clear how they're going to mature and become companies. That's sort of one thing. Another thing that we think about a lot of Betaworks is it's incredibly cheap now to not only build something, but also build it to scale. So if you take Bitly, for example, so with Bitly, we started up Bitly 18 months ago, and last month in January we did 2.6 billion Bitly links were clicked on around the web. 2.6 billion, yesterday there was 90 million. That's a lot. If you think that in August of last year, Google sort of comparable metric had about 6.9 billion searches. So the fact that Bitly was in January of this year, you know, about half of where, a little bit less than half of where Google was in terms of number of searches. We've spent less than $10 million creating Bitly. Computers, the servers, the people, the infrastructure, the engineers, the team, the business team. It's remarkable what you can do now with, you know, less than $10 million. And so what that says to me is that if you can figure out, it's a long way of getting to your question, is that if you can figure out a way to monetize, and then you don't need to raise the buckets of money that people have been raising, from VC or private equity. And so I think that what you're going to see is you're going to see a shift in this sort of, in this world of what we sometimes call micro development. You're going to see a shift where you see an economy emerging that's independent of the traditional VC economy. I mean, the place where it's happening most clearly is in the iPhone app economy, right? Well, you have people who are engineers, one guy and a good idea, and that they're making a couple of $100,000 a year now off their app. They're never taking any VC money, they're never taking any investment. They don't need anything like that, and suddenly they got more than a job.
But does that mean ultimately the demise of traditional media, which is unavoidably costly in terms of production?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's I wouldn't say, I think that it's fun to paint in black and white terms. I think that it won't be the pure demise. I mean, I think that the cost side of traditional media, the cost side of the problem is a huge piece of the problem, right? So you come by here, now we're talking about traditional media, but you're showing up with your $1,000 camera. If the CNN guys were here, they'd be here with $50,000 worth of equipment, right? And yet, you and I know there's just no need for that any longer. And yet, all that cost infrastructure is really hard to take out of a company because you spent 50 years sort of building that into the whole, from the printing presses all the way through your production process, through your editorial process, to the way you pay your writers, etc., etc. And so it is that is hugely dislocating and difficult. And it's my friends at Time Warner think about that every day. I mean, it's very difficult.
On that rather depressing note, although perhaps inspiring for some people, I want to thank you, John.
Oh, thank you, Andrew.
It was all right.